Welcome back, dear darlings. Today we are back again with a new story. Hope you enjoy it. Today's story is He Ruined My Life. I went back in time and took everything.
Chapter 1: The Verdict of the Rain. The rain in Seoul did not just fall, it battered. It tasted of copper, ash, and the bitter tang of absolute ruin. Arya stood on the unforgiving granite steps of the Supreme Court, her trench coat plastered to a frame that was shivering uncontrollably. She was 28 years old. Just 6 months ago, she had been the undisputed darling of the nation, the youngest actress in history to sweep the Grand Bell Awards, the face of a dozen international luxury brands, and the glittering jewel of the South Korean entertainment industry. Now, she was the most reviled woman in the country. Arya. Look here. Is it true you embezzled $30 million from Apex Entertainment? Arya, did you orchestrate the offshore shell companies to fund illicit gambling syndicates? Are you ashamed of betraying your fans? They were a pack of starving wolves, their microphones thrust like jagged daggers toward her face, their camera flashes creating a blinding, strobe light hell. Arya could not speak. Her vocal cords were paralyzed by a cocktail of betrayal, terror, and a sheer, unadulterated shock that defied human comprehension. She looked past the violently undulating sea of camera lenses, past the screaming reporters, and saw him. Marcus. Her fiancé. The CEO of Apex Entertainment. He was sitting in the back of his sleek, midnight black Maybach, parked safely beyond the police barricades. His handsome, sharply angled face was arranged into a meticulous mask of solemn disappointment, the perfect picture of a heartbroken lover and a betrayed corporate leader. But Arya knew the micro-expressions of that face better than she knew her own. She saw the slight, imperceptible curve of his lower lip. A smirk. A triumphant, terrifyingly cold smirk. He had orchestrated every single detail. Over the past 3 years, Marcus had systematically forged her signature on dozens of complex financial documents. He had used her private banking accounts to funnel his massive, secret gambling debts and systematic corporate theft into impenetrable offshore havens. When the internal auditors finally caught wind of the missing millions, Marcus had tipped off the Financial Crimes Unit, presenting them with a beautifully curated, ironclad trail of evidence that pointed squarely at the naive actress who trusted him with her life. He was walking away with absolute control of his company and his freedom, while she was staring down the barrel of 20 years in a maximum security prison. Her defense attorney. A slick, fast-talking man whom Marcus had handpicked and secretly paid off, shoved her roughly toward the waiting police transport. Keep your head down, Arya. Don't say a word. You're making it worse. Arya stumbled, her stiletto heel catching on the slick granite. She never made it to the precinct. The intersection of Gangnam Boulevard was a slick, blinding mirror of neon reflections and torrential rain. The heavy commercial delivery truck came out of nowhere, running a red light at 80 miles per hour. The sound of tearing, screaming metal was deafening, a monstrous roar that swallowed the sirens. Arya felt the violent, catastrophic impact shatter her ribs before her brain could even process the pain. The world spun into a dizzying, horrific smear of blood, shattered glass, and screeching tires. As the crushing weight of the car folded in on itself, collapsing her lungs, her final thought was not a plea for salvation, nor was it a lament for her stolen career. It was a singular, burning vow forged in the absolute zero furnace of her dying heart. If I had one more chance. If I had just one more day. I would tear his empire down to the bedrock. I would make him choke on his own ambition. Then, the darkness rushed in to claim her. Chapter 2: The Echoes of Yesterday. Arya gasped violently, her eyes snapping open as her lungs greedily sucked in air. She bolted upright, her hands frantically clutching at her chest, fully expecting to feel the jagged, agonizing edges of broken ribs piercing her skin. She expected the scent of gasoline and blood. Instead, she felt the soft, cool silk of her pajamas. She smelled the faint, comforting aroma of vanilla and lavender diffusers. She was in a bed. Her bed. But it wasn't the sprawling, oppressive king-sized mattress in Marcus's glass-walled penthouse. It was the modest, comfortable bed in the small Gangnam apartment she had lived in before he had convinced her to move in with him. Trembling uncontrollably, a cold sweat breaking out across her forehead, she scrambled out of bed and rushed to the full-length mirror leaning against her closet door. The face staring back at her was entirely unmarred. Her skin glowed with a youthful, stress-free vitality. There were no dark circles of exhaustion under her eyes, no lines of perpetual worry etched around her mouth. She lunged for her smartphone resting on the wooden nightstand. The screen illuminated the dark room, burning the date into her retinas. May 25, 2021. Arya dropped the phone. It clattered loudly against the hardwood floor. 5 years. She had died in the twisted wreckage of a police cruiser and woken up exactly 5 years in the past. It was 2021. This was the year she was scheduled to win her first major Grand Bell Award. This was the year Marcus would propose to her in a private garden in Paris. This was the year the velvet trap began to quietly, invisibly assemble around her. Arya sank slowly to the floor, her breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps as the visceral memories of the courtroom, the blinding flashes, the betrayal, and the crushing impact washed over her in a tidal wave of phantom pain. She pressed her palms hard against her eyes until she saw stars. When she finally pulled her hands away, the lingering terror of her death was gone. It had evaporated, leaving behind something infinitely more dangerous. A chilling, absolute, crystalline clarity. She was not going to be a victim this time. She was not going to be the naive, trusting actress who blindly signed whatever documents her lover placed in front of her. The stage was set, the actors were blindly taking their places, but this time, Arya was writing the script. And it was going to be a tragedy. Chapter 3, Severing the Strings. The absolute first order of business was excising Marcus from her life before his roots could dig any deeper into her finances. They were scheduled to have dinner that very night, the dinner where he was going to subtly convince her to merge their investment portfolios. Arya dressed meticulously. In her past life, she had worn a soft, blush-pink romantic dress to appease his preference for her to look delicate and dependent. Tonight, she opted for a sharp, tailored, charcoal gray blazer and wide-legged trousers. She pulled her hair back into a severe, sleek bun. When she arrived at the upscale, dimly lit French restaurant, Marcus was already there, sipping a glass of vintage Bordeaux and exuding the easy, predatory charm that perfectly concealed his rotting core. "You look sharp tonight," Marcus noted, his eyes narrowing slightly as she took her seat. He didn't like the suit. It didn't fit the narrative. "I feel sharp," Arya replied, her voice cool, modulated, and perfectly level. Before he could launch into his rehearsed, manipulative monologue about their shared future, Arya reached into her designer handbag and placed a small, velvet box on the table. It was a luxury watch she had bought him weeks ago, an anniversary gift. "I'm ending this, Marcus," she said, her tone as casual as if she were ordering water. His confident, arrogant smile faltered, replaced by genuine confusion. "Is this a joke?" "Arya, we're at the absolute peak of our careers. We're the golden couple of soul." "I don't love you," she stated, delivering the line with the cold, calculated precision of a veteran stage actress. "Furthermore, I will not be renewing my exclusive management contract with Apex Entertainment when it expires at the end of next month. I am stepping away from the camera. Indefinitely." Marcus stared at her for 3 agonizingly long seconds before he let out a harsh, dismissive bark of laughter. "Step away? Arya, listen to yourself. You are nothing without Apex. You are nothing without me guiding your career. I built you. If you walk out that door, I will personally ensure you never work in this industry again. You'll be forgotten in 6 months." Arya leaned in close, her eyes devoid of any warmth. "I'm counting on it," she whispered. She stood up, leaving the velvet box on the table, and walked out of the restaurant, leaving the most powerful man in Korean entertainment stunned and furious amidst the clinking of fine crystal and the murmur of affluent diners. The next morning, Arya initiated a scorched earth financial protocol. She contacted her private wealth manager and liquidated absolutely every asset she possessed. Her stock portfolios, her mutual funds, the 2 luxury sports cars she had bought with her early endorsement money, she converted everything into untraceable liquid capital. She amassed roughly $8 million. To the average citizen, it was an unimaginable fortune. To the entertainment industry, where a single blockbuster budget dwarfed that number, it was a drop in the ocean. She needed a weapon. She needed a fortress. Chapter 4: The Ghost Agency. She found her weapon in a dingy, water-damaged office building on the absolute outskirts of the city, wedged between a failing laundromat and a 24-hour noodle shop. The frosted glass door, peeling at the edges, read, Nova Star Management. Nova Star was the undisputed laughingstock of the industry. It was a microscopic, failing agency teetering on the precipice of bankruptcy, currently managing a pathetic roster of a few desperate D-list social media influencers and 2 forgotten child stars. Its CEO, a weary, chronically stressed man named Thomas Lin, looked up in sheer, unadulterated shock as South Korea's biggest actress walked into his cramped office, stepping over a pile of unopened utility bills. Ms. Arya? What in God's name are you doing here? Thomas stammered, frantically trying to sweep empty instant ramen cups off his chipped mahogany desk. I'm here to buy your company, Mr. Lin, Arya said smoothly, taking a seat in a rickety visitor's chair that squeaked violently under her weight. Thomas blinked, his jaw dropping. By Nova Star? Ms. Arya, with all due respect, we are 4 months behind on rent. We don't have a single profitable talent on the roster. Our phone hasn't rung with a legitimate casting offer in over a year. Why would you want to board a sinking ship? Because your sinking ship has a fully legitimate, grandfathered operating license, an established corporate structure, and most importantly, absolutely nobody in the industry is looking at it, Arya explained, sliding a thick manila folder across the desk. Here is the deal. I will personally pay off every cent of your corporate debt. I will give you a $2 million cash buyout today, and I will keep you on as the chief operating officer with a tripled salary. But I own 95% of the shares. I hold the reins. I call the shots. Thomas stared at her, then down at the contract. It wasn't just a lifeline thrown to a drowning man, it was a luxury yacht pulling up beside him. He signed the paperwork so fast he nearly tore the page. Welcome to Nova Star, boss, Thomas breathed, handing the pen back, his hands shaking. So, what's our first move? Are we holding a press conference to announce your signing? The PR alone will save the company overnight. No, Arya said sharply, her eyes flashing. I am officially retired from the public eye. My ownership of this agency will be buried behind 3 impenetrable layers of offshore shell companies. To the world, Nova Star remains a struggling, pathetic indie agency scraping the bottom of the barrel. But behind closed doors, Thomas, we are going to build a war machine. Chapter 5: Assembling the Vanguard. To bankrupt an entrenched titan like Apex Entertainment, Arya couldn't just play the game better, she had to flip the board entirely. Apex thrived on an industrial factory model, churning out highly polished, completely interchangeable idols and heavily manufactured, generic actors. They relied on overwhelming volume, aggressive media buyouts, and sheer financial muscle to crush independent competitors. Arya's strategy had to be asymmetrical. She didn't need 100 mediocre talents to generate revenue, she needed a handful of absolute, undeniable supernovas. And thanks to the memories of the 5 years she had already lived, she knew exactly where the uncut diamonds were buried. Her first target was a young, brooding 22-year-old named Julian Thorne. In her previous life, Julian had been a struggling barista who was discovered purely by accident 3 years too late by a rival agency. He had eventually become an international sensation for his raw, visceral, intensely terrifying acting style. Right now, he was pouring lattes in a busy cafe in Hongdae, entirely unaware of the cinematic genius lying dormant in his blood. Arya walked into the cafe on a rainy Tuesday, wearing a baseball cap pulled low and oversized sunglasses. She sat in a corner booth for 3 hours, just watching Julian work. He was quiet, efficient, but there was an intensity to his movements. A simmering, unspoken depth that practically radiated from his bones. She waited until his shift ended at 6 p.m. and intercepted him in the damp alleyway behind the shop as he was taking out the trash. "You're wasting your life making coffee," she told him, stepping out of the shadows and handing him a sleek, black business card. "You belong in front of a camera. You belong in a theater." Julian scoffed, wiping his damp hands on his stained apron, eyeing her suspiciously. "Nova Star Management? Never heard of it. Look, lady, I'm not interested in wearing makeup and being some plastic pop star singing love songs. I don't want a pop star. I want a monster," Arya said. She reached up and pulled down her sunglasses just enough for the alleyway streetlight to illuminate her face. Julian's eyes widened in profound shock. Every citizen in Korea knew that face. "I am quietly funding a dark psychological thriller next month," Arya continued, never breaking eye contact. "The lead role is a psychopathic detective who slowly loses his grip on reality. The script is brilliant, but it requires someone who isn't afraid to be ugly on screen. The role is yours if you sign with me. Full creative control, and a 70-30 profit split in your favor." The industry standard for rookies was a predatory, soul-crushing 90-10 split in the agency's favor. Julian looked down at the matte black card, then back up at Arya's unyielding expression. He showed up at the Nova Star offices the very next morning and signed his life over to her. Her second target was Clara Yoon. Clara was a visionary, eccentric female director whom Marcus had systematically blacklisted and destroyed in Arya's past life simply because she had aggressively refused his unwanted sexual advances at an industry party. Clara currently had 3 brilliant, avant-garde scripts gathering dust in her tiny, unheated studio apartment, her spirit utterly broken by the patriarchal industry. Arya didn't bother with a meeting. She drove straight to Clara's cramped studio, knocked on the door, and when a disheveled, defeated Clara opened it, Arya walked past her, slammed a heavy metal briefcase onto her dining table, and popped the locks. Inside was $1 million in neatly banded cash, Arya's own money. "Make your masterpiece," Arya commanded, pointing at a script titled The Glass Cage lying on the counter. "I will not interfere with your vision. I will not demand script changes. Nova Star will handle the distribution, the marketing, and the festival submissions. You just direct." Clara stared at the cash, burst into tears, and hugged Arya. Within 4 months, operating entirely in the shadows, Arya had meticulously assembled a terrifyingly potent roster: Julian, the brooding actor; Clara, the clandestine director, a prodigious, socially anxious songwriter who had been rejected by Apex for not being conventionally attractive; and Maya, a striking, unconventional model who defied every traditional standard of beauty. Nova Star operated out of a newly renovated, heavily secured bunker-like basement beneath their decrepit office building. Thomas handled the public-facing duties, projecting the image of a bumbling but earnest CEO to the press. Arya, meanwhile, orchestrated every single move from a windowless war room equipped with a wall of glowing monitors, white bards, and financial trackers monitoring Apex Entertainment's every breath. She was no longer an actress. She was a phantom. A phantom who was about to go to war. Chapter 6, First Blood. The entertainment industry operates on a very simple principle: momentum. Apex Entertainment's untouchable momentum was built on securing the most lucrative international brand deals and the most highly anticipated domestic blockbuster roles. In Arya's past life, the turning point that cemented Apex's absolute dominance in 2022 was securing 2 massive victories. The global ambassadorship for Lumiere, a legacy French luxury fashion house, and landing the lead role in the $50 million historical epic film, Crimson Throne. Marcus had used these twin victories to dramatically inflate Apex's stock price, giving him the massive financial leverage he needed to begin his fraudulent offshore borrowing. Arya was going to sever that timeline with a surgical strike. The casting call for Crimson Throne was heavily biased from the start. The veteran director secretly wanted a fresh, unknown face, but Marcus was aggressively using his leverage to push his top Nepo baby actor, a talentless, pretty boy heir named Leo. In the original timeline, the director eventually caved to Marcus's unrelenting pressure, and the movie was a moderate, soulless success. This time Arya unleashed Julian. She spent 3 grueling weeks coaching him herself in the basement of Nova Star. She pulled from her own award-winning acting repertoire, teaching him how to command the physical space of a room, how to use dead silence as a psychological weapon, and how to convey explosive violence with a simple twitch of his jaw. When Julian walked into the audition room at the major broadcasting station, the casting directors and producers were exhausted, having suffered through dozens of mediocre, overacted readings. Julian didn't even introduce himself. He walked to the center of the room, locked his dark, intense eyes with the lead director, and launched instantly into the climactic monologue. He didn't just recite the lines, he bled them onto the floor. He was terrifying, magnetic, and utterly mesmerizing. He transformed the sterile audition room into a battlefield. When he finished, the silence in the room was so profound you could hear the air conditioning humming. The director slowly stood up, his hands visibly shaking. Who is your representation, son?" "Nova Star Management," Julian replied smoothly, turning and walking out. When Marcus received the phone call that his golden boy Leo had been unceremoniously rejected in favor of an absolute nobody from a Poverty Row agency, he completely lost his temper, shattering his office window with a titanium golf club. The second, much deeper blow landed a week later. Lumiere was looking for a new face for their global campaign. Apex arrogantly offered their top female idol, assuming it was a mere formality. However, Arya had anticipated this move. She knew from her past life that the eccentric CEO of Lumiere was a staunch advocate for female empowerment, independent art, and breaking traditional beauty norms. Arya leveraged her heavily concealed connections to secure a private, highly exclusive screening of Clara Yoon's newly finished indie film in Paris. Following the emotional screening, Thomas Lynn presented Clara's lead actress, Maya, as the perfect, breathing embodiment of Lumiere's new modern, artistic, and rebellious direction. The French executives were utterly enamored. They bypassed Apex entirely and signed Maya to a staggering multi-million-dollar, 5-year exclusive contract. Inside Apex headquarters, Marcus stared at the industry news portals on his monitor in sheer disbelief. Headline: Unknown agency Nova Star snags Canbound director and global Lumiere campaign in 1 week. Apex left in the dust? Who the hell is running Nova Star? Marcus screamed at his head of public relations, his face mottled purple with rage. Find out who their secret investors are. Bury them in bad press. I want their talents poached, bribed, or blackmailed by tomorrow morning. But when Apex's ruthless corporate fixers attempted to approach Julian and Maya, they smashed headfirst into a brick wall. Arya had locked her talents into ironclad, profoundly generous contracts with unprecedented profit shares. More importantly, they were fiercely, unbreakably loyal to the mysterious benefactor who had believed in them when the rest of the world had ignored them. Arya sat in her basement war room, watching Apex's stock ticker dip into the red for the first time in 3 consecutive years. She took a slow sip of her black coffee, a cold, predatory smile playing on her lips. The beast was finally bleeding. Chapter 7: The Corporate Hemorrhage. Drawing first blood was immensely satisfying, but a few lost contracts wouldn't be enough to bankrupt a multinational conglomerate like Apex Entertainment. To truly destroy Marcus, Arya had to attack his internal infrastructure. She needed to rot the company from the inside out, removing the pillars that held his empire aloft. Marcus's entire management style was built on a foundation of fear, intense exploitation, and weaponized non-disclosure agreements. He chronically overworked his staff, severely underpaid his junior managers, and kept his mid-tier artists in a state of perpetual indentured servitude through highly convoluted, predatory accounting tricks. Arya knew exactly who was vulnerable because, in her past life, She had been the one comforting these weeping stylists, overworked managers, and stressed lawyers in the break rooms. She began a systematic, surgical extraction of Apex's human capital. It started with Apex's head of legal, a brilliant but chronically abused woman named Sarah Kong. Sarah was the architect who drafted Apex's labyrinthine contracts, and she knew exactly where all the corporate bodies were buried. Arya set up a meeting with Sarah in a quiet, underground jazz club, operating through an encrypted messaging app. "I know Marcus takes absolute credit for your legal victories," Arya told the bewildered lawyer, sliding a thick manila folder across the sticky table. "I know he threatened to ruin your husband's logistics business if you ever tried to quit. Look inside the folder. I bought your husband's outstanding debt from the bank. It's completely forgiven. Wiped clean." Sarah gasped, flipping through the bank documents, tears welling in her eyes. "If you come to Nova Star," Arya continued softly, "you will be a full equity partner, not a glorified servant. You will set your own hours. And most importantly, you can finally help me legally dismantle those illegal, modern-day slave contracts you were forced to write for Marcus." Sarah wept openly into her hands. She marched into Apex headquarters the next morning, slammed her resignation letter onto Marcus's desk, and walked out. Over the next 6 months, Nova Star executed a silent, devastating raid on Apex's best personnel. Arya poached Marcus's most ruthless PR crisis manager, his top 3 talent scouts who had eyes for generational talent, and his most deeply connected financial auditor. She didn't offer them fame, she offered them equity, fundamental respect, and a chance to destroy the tyrant who had terrorized their lives. Apex's daily operations began to violently stutter. Without his veteran, experienced staff to clean up his messes, Marcus's new, inexperienced hires made critical, public errors. Scandals that would have usually been swiftly swept under the rug by his old PR team began aggressively leaking to the press. A severe DUI involving an Apex lead idol. A massive, documented bullying accusation against the leader of their top boy band. A tax evasion rumor regarding a senior actor. Marcus was bleeding millions in cash attempting to quietly settle lawsuits and pay off extortionist media outlets. His primary investors were getting incredibly restless. The board of directors called an emergency meeting, demanding immediate answers for the sudden, catastrophic 20% drop in quarterly profits. To make matters exponentially worse, Nova Star was rapidly evolving from an annoyance into an unstoppable juggernaut. Julian's movie, Crimson Throne, shattered domestic box office records, earning him a Best Actor nomination. Clara Yoon won the prestigious Best Director award at Cannes for The Glass Cage. Maya's face was plastered on every high-end billboard from Milan to Tokyo. Nova Star was no longer a joke. It was the most exclusive, prestigious, and highly sought-after boutique agency in the world. Desperation, a cold, cloying desperation, began to severely cloud Marcus's judgment. In the original timeline, Marcus had initiated his massive corporate fraud out of pure, unadulterated arrogance and greed. He had wanted to buy a massive television network outright, and he used Arya's money to illegally leverage the purchase. Now, his motivations had shifted. He wasn't acting out of greed. He was acting out of pure survival. He desperately needed a massive injection of capital to appease his furious shareholders, inflate the stock price, and stop the relentless bleeding, or the board would officially vote to oust him as CEO. Arya had successfully backed him into a corner. Now, it was time to hand him the shovel he would use to dig his own grave. Chapter 8, The Poisoned Apple. The trap required a bait so incredibly irresistible, so perfectly tailored to Marcus's massive ego and current desperation, that he wouldn't dare look closely at the hidden hooks. Arya utilized a highly secretive contact from her past life, an eccentric, high-rolling venture capitalist based in Singapore who owed her a massive favor for a stock tip that had saved him from bankruptcy years ago. Through a dizzying labyrinth of offshore shell companies registered in the Cayman Islands, the British Virgin Islands, and Cyprus, Arya established a completely fabricated entity named Aegis Media Partners. Aegis Media publicly announced its intention to co-produce a massive, $300 million sci-fi cinematic universe, actively looking for a premier South Korean partner to handle the CGI production and local distribution. The projected returns on investment were astronomical. It was the exact type of grandiose, global, ego-stroking project Marcus desperately needed to save his sinking ship. Aria's proxy, a slick, highly paid British corporate lawyer named Sterling, approached Apex Entertainment with the exclusive deal. Aria sat in her basement war room, watching the negotiations live via a hidden micro-camera installed in Sterling's briefcase. She watched as Marcus, his face drawn and tight with barely suppressed desperation, aggressively pitched Apex as the only viable partner in Asia. "We require a direct co-investment of exactly $50 million from Apex to secure the exclusive local distribution rights," Sterling said smoothly, delivering the lines exactly as Aria had mercilessly drilled into him. "However, Aegis Media requires this capital to be transferred to our primary holding accounts in Cyprus within exactly 30 days to begin immediate pre-production. If not, we will take the deal elsewhere." "50 million? Marcus hesitated, visibly swallowing hard. "Our liquid assets are currently, temporarily tied up in internal restructuring." "That is highly unfortunate, Mr. Cho," Sterling replied, feigning disappointment. "We were truly hoping to work with a legacy institution like Apex. But perhaps this new agency we keep reading about, Nova Star? Perhaps they might have the liquid capital. They've been quite aggressive in the market lately." It was a masterstroke of psychological warfare. Mentioning Nova Star to Marcus was like waving a blood-soaked rag in front of a starving, wounded wolf. "No." Marcus snapped, violently slamming his hand flat on his mahogany desk. The sharp sound echoed sweetly in Aria's earpiece. "Nova Star is a fluke. A flash in the pan. Apex is an institution. You will have your 50 million by the end of the month. I guarantee it." Aria leaned back in her ergonomic chair, a profound, chilling sense of déjà vu washing over her. She knew for a mathematical fact that Marcus did not have $50 million in liquid cash. The only possible way he could generate that kind of capital in 30 days was to steal it from his own company, forging board approval documents, illegally leveraging Apex's employee pension funds, and draining the escrow accounts of his own artists. It was the exact same crime he had committed in her past life. Only this time, he couldn't pin the blame on Aria. She wasn't his naive, trusting fiancée, she was a ghost he didn't even know he was fighting. Chapter 9, The Final Countdown. For the next 29 days, Marcus frantically cooked the books. Sarah Kong, Aria's poached former Apex lawyer, used her residual knowledge of Apex's internal routing systems and a few well-placed digital backdoors to secretly monitor his digital footprint. From the safety of the Nova Star war room, Aria and Sarah watched in real time as Marcus systematically destroyed his own life. They watched his IP address log into restricted servers at 3 a.m. They tracked the forged digital signatures he applied to board approval forms. They watched as he bypassed internal compliance protocols, slowly draining the accounts of his own artists, siphoning the money through a dozen internal dummy accounts to assemble the $50 million. He was sweating, panicking, and making sloppy digital errors. He was leaving a trail a mile wide. On the 30th day, at precisely 2 p.m., the wire transfer hit the Aegis Media account in Cyprus. Aria didn't hesitate. She immediately executed a series of pre-planned legal maneuvers. She froze the Cyprus account instantly. She legally dissolved the Aegis Media shell company, triggering a hard, unerasable, international digital audit trail. The paper trail linked directly, undeniably back to Marcus's personal office IP address, his forged credentials, and his stolen funds. She compiled the hundreds of pages of undeniable evidence into a single, encrypted digital dossier. "Send it," Aria told Sarah, her voice colder than ice. Sarah pressed the enter key. The dossier was simultaneously emailed to the Financial Crimes Unit of the Seoul Prosecutor's Office, the Apex Board of Directors, and the top 3 investigative journalism outlets in South Korea. The poisoned apple had been fully swallowed. The venom was now racing through his veins, and there was absolutely no antidote. Chapter 10, Checkmate in Silk. The annual Korean Entertainment Awards Gala was the glittering, undisputed jewel of the industry's social calendar. Held in the grand, opulent ballroom of the Shilla Hotel, it was a night of overflowing champagne, million-dollar haute couture, and ruthless, backstabbing networking. For the first time in 2 entire years, Arya attended a public event. She wore a breathtaking, custom-designed, backless silk gown the color of a midnight sky. But she didn't walk the red carpet as an actress. She walked it as the newly revealed, sole owner and CEO of Nova Star Management. The press had been tipped off an hour prior to her arrival. The explosive revelation that the vanished, beloved darling of Korean cinema was the hidden mastermind behind the terrifying agency that had brought Apex to its knees was the biggest entertainment news story of the decade. When Arya stepped out of her limousine, the flashbulbs erupted with the blinding intensity of a dying star. She glided gracefully into the grand ballroom, flanked by her fiercely loyal vanguard, Julian, looking devastatingly sharp in a tuxedo, Maya, radiant in an avant-garde dress, Clara, Sarah, and Thomas. The room physically parted for her like the Red Sea. Whispers hissed through the massive crowd, eyes wide with profound shock, jealousy, and awe. Across the room, standing near the ice sculpture, Marcus stood frozen, a crystal glass of champagne halted midway to his mouth. He looked 10 years older. His face was gaunt, his eyes heavily bloodshot from weeks of unimaginable stress. When he saw Arya, the realization hit him with the physical, breath-stealing force of a freight train. He dropped his glass. It shattered loudly on the polished marble floor. Arya walked slowly, deliberately toward him, her stiletto heels clicking a steady, rhythmic death knell over the sudden, hushed silence of the surrounding crowd. She stopped exactly 3 feet away from him, her expression an impenetrable, beautiful fortress of absolute calm. "Arya," he breathed, his voice trembling violently. You're the one. You own Nova Star." "Hello, Marcus," she said, her voice carrying clearly, echoing slightly in the silent ballroom. "It has been quite a while." "You did this," he hissed, his face twisting into a hideous, ugly mask of unbridled rage. He took a threatening step forward, his fists tightly clenched. "You stole my talents. You poached my best staff. You deliberately ruined my company." "I simply offered them a vastly superior alternative to a sinking ship," Arya replied smoothly, not flinching an inch. "I'll crush you," Marcus spat, lowering his voice to a venomous, desperate whisper. "You think you've won? I just secured a massive, global co-production. Aegis Media. Tomorrow morning, when the market opens, Apex's stock is going to skyrocket, and I will use every single cent of that leverage to legally bury you and your pathetic agency." Arya smiled. It was a terrifying, beautiful, utterly devastating smile. "Aegis Media?" she asked, feigning innocent curiosity. "You mean the Cyprus holding company registered to a Mr. Sterling? The exact same company that was legally dissolved at 4:00 p.m. this afternoon?" Marcus stopped breathing. All the remaining color aggressively drained from his face, leaving him looking exactly like a terrified corpse. What the hell are you talking about?" "Aegis Media does not exist, Marcus," Arya said, taking one step closer, her voice a lethal, vibrating purr. "I created it. And I know exactly where the $50 million you wired to it came from. You stole from your own investors. You drained your artists' escrows. You forged the signatures of your board of directors. You are a thief." Marcus stumbled backward, colliding heavily with a cocktail table, sending hors d'oeuvres clattering to the floor. No, that's impossible, you couldn't have. I have the complete digital audit trail. I have your IP logs. I have your forged signatures," Arya said, her voice rising slightly. "And as of precisely 10 minutes ago, so does the Financial Crimes Unit." As if completely on cue, the heavy, towering oak doors of the grand ballroom swung open with a violent crash. A dozen men and women in dark windbreakers bearing the bright yellow insignia of the Financial Crimes Unit marched decisively into the room, their badges flashing under the crystal chandeliers. The string quartet in the corner abruptly stopped playing mid-note. The silence in the room was absolute, heavy, and suffocating. The lead prosecutor marched straight past the terrified, frozen celebrities, his eyes locked dead on Marcus. "Marcus Cho. You are under arrest for grand corporate fraud, gross embezzlement, and severe document forgery. You have the right to remain silent." Marcus didn't hear the rest of his Miranda rights. He was staring blankly at Arya, his mind violently shattering as the millions of pieces of the puzzle aggressively snapped together in his brain. She hadn't just beaten him in a business rivalry. She had surgically, patiently dismantled his entire life, led him willingly into a trap of his own greedy making, and delivered him to the authorities on a silver platter. "Why?" he whispered brokenly, as the aggressive officers violently wrenched his arms behind his back and slapped the cold, heavy steel handcuffs onto his wrists. "Why did you do this to me?" Arya looked deeply into the eyes of the man who had ordered her death in another lifetime. She searched her soul for a flicker of pity, or even lingering anger. She found nothing but the cold, satisfying finality of a massive debt repaid in full. "Because, Marcus," she said, her voice ringing out like a bell in the completely silent ballroom, "I told you I was rewriting the script. And your character was always meant to die in the first act." As the police aggressively dragged a weeping, broken Marcus away, his entire empire crumbling into invisible dust behind him, Arya turned her back on him. She didn't watch him leave. She faced her team, Julian, Maya, Clara, Sarah, and Thomas. They were smiling brightly, their eyes shining with fierce, protective loyalty and absolute triumph. The camera flashbulbs began to fire again, a blinding ocean of white light. But this time, they didn't blind her. This time, Arya stood comfortably in the light, unbroken, unbowed, the undisputed, absolute queen of an empire she had built directly from the ashes of her own ruin. The camera shutters clicked frantically, immortalizing the dawn of the Nova Star era. The past was finally, truly dead. Her future was entirely her own.
Thank you for watching, dear darlings. Don't forget to like and subscribe the channel for more such story.